I still remember the morning everything changed. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, almost painful, as if the air itself is waiting for you to finally face the truth you've been running from for years. I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The sunlight was touching the edge of the table, but it did not feel warm. Nothing felt warm that day. Because inside me, something was breaking. Something old, something tired, something I had carried for far too long without even realizing it. That was the day I learned who I really was. Not who my family thought I was. Not who I pretended to be. Not who I forced myself to become just to keep peace. It was the day I saw myself honestly. The good, the broken, the silent, the forgiving, the invisible parts of me, all at once. And everything changed. I wish I could tell you that this realization came gently through a soft moment or a kind word, but the truth is, it came through hurt. Not loud hurt, not dramatic hurt, but quiet hurt, the kind that sits in the heart and whispers, "You don't belong here anymore." It happened after a small comment, a small moment, but sometimes the smallest things open the biggest doors inside us. That morning, when my daughter-in-law looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Maybe it's better if you stay in your room for a while. We need space," I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I just smiled. A small, soft smile. The kind you give when you have no strength left to defend yourself. She didn't say it angrily. She didn't say it loudly. But the message was still clear. You are too much. You take up space. You are not needed. Or at least that's what I heard. That's what my heart heard. And as I slowly walked back to my room, I felt something inside me shift. As if an old mirror had cracked, and for the first time I could see the reflection I had ignored for years. My name doesn't matter. What matters is the journey that brought me to that moment. The journey of a woman who spent her whole life trying to be everything for everyone. I grew up in a small, modest home with simple parents who taught me simple values. Be kind, be patient, be grateful, keep the family together no matter what. These lessons shaped me. Maybe too much. I married young, the way many women in my generation did. I gave my heart, my time, my energy, my dreams, all willingly, all fully, without keeping anything for myself. I believed that a good wife gives without asking, listens without speaking, and sacrifices without complaining. Years passed, and my life became a rhythm of cooking, cleaning, caring, and smiling. Always smiling. When my first child was born, I felt like the world had placed a tiny star in my hands. I was nervous, excited, overwhelmed, but I was alive in a way I had never been before. And when my son grew, walked, talked, laughed, I poured my entire soul into raising him. Maybe too much, because somewhere along the way, I stopped existing for myself. I became a mother, a caretaker, a helper, a background presence, almost invisible. My husband was a quiet man, good, but distant. He worked hard, provided for us, and came home tired. We shared responsibilities, shared worries, shared routines, but we rarely shared hearts. Life was practical, not emotional. Years blended. One by one, responsibilities piled up. My children grew, my hair grayed, my hands wrinkled, my dreams faded into corners I no longer visited. And then, one day, my son got married. A beautiful day. A day full of hope and new beginnings. I welcomed my daughter-in-law with all the love I had. I told myself I would not be the kind of mother-in-law who creates tension. I promised myself I would be gentle, understanding, helpful. Maybe I tried too hard. Because sometimes, when you try too hard to be kind, people stop seeing you as a person. They see you as someone who will never say no, never speak up, never ask for anything. And that is how I slowly became a shadow in my own home. At first, things were peaceful. Small conversations, warm tea time moments, shared laughter. But over time, little distances grew. Little misunderstandings piled up. Little silences became longer. I told myself it was normal. Every household changes. Every relationship adjusts. Every bond has its seasons. But one day, without warning, I realized that the home I helped build no longer felt like mine. My presence felt optional. My voice felt unnecessary. My footsteps felt like interruptions. I became the person who waited for others to need me. And when they didn't, I simply stayed out of the way. I told myself it was respect. But deep down, it was fear. Fear of being a burden. Fear of being unwanted. Fear of discovering who I had become. It began with small moments. Moments so small you would miss them if you weren't paying attention. A cup not handed to me at the table. A conversation started without including me. A door closed a little too quickly. A sigh when I entered the room. A whispered sentence I wasn't meant to hear. None of it was cruel. None of it was loud. It was simply the slow fading of a person from the center of their own family. I tried to explain it to myself. They are busy. They are tired. They don't mean anything by it. But hurt has a way of collecting itself like dust, quietly, silently, until one day you see it everywhere. My daughter-in-law wasn't unkind. She was young, learning, managing her own stresses. But sometimes even good people hurt others without realizing it. One afternoon, while she was rearranging the kitchen, she said, "Maybe it's better if you stay in your room for a while. I'll handle things." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes said something else. Something like, "You interfere. You don't fit our style. You are in the way." And I smiled again. Smiling had become my shield. But inside, something tightened. Then came the day I knocked on their bedroom door to ask if they wanted tea, and I heard her whisper, "She means well, but I need my own space. I can't breathe sometimes." My heart froze. Not because she meant harm, she didn't, but because she was right. I had spent my whole life trying to belong, trying to hold everything together, trying to avoid becoming the lonely elder no one wants around, that I had become exactly what I feared. A presence people tolerated, not treasured, not loved the way I once was, just tolerated. But I still kept quiet, kept smiling, kept shrinking, until the morning that changed everything. That morning, the cold tea, the silent kitchen, the tightening chest, it felt different. I walked in and saw my daughter-in-law folding laundry. She looked tired, overwhelmed. She hesitated before speaking. "I think we need some space. Maybe you can rest in your room for a while?" Her tone was not rude. It was not harsh. It was simply honest. And for the first time in many years, I heard the truth behind someone's words without covering it with excuses. I wasn't needed. I wasn't included. I wasn't part of their world the way I wished I was. But instead of crying, instead of arguing, Instead of defending myself, I smiled. Because in that moment, something inside me opened. A door I had locked many years ago. A door to myself.
When I returned to my room, I closed the door gently, as if I were afraid the sound itself would disturb someone. I sat on the edge of my bed, placed my hands on my lap, and stared at the soft wrinkles on my skin. Wrinkles that told stories no one had ever asked me about. For the first time in a very long time, I did not feel sad because of someone else. I felt sad because of myself. Because I realized how much of my life I had spent pretending I was fine, pretending I was happy, pretending that being useful was the same as being loved. I had never let myself feel anything deeply. I had always pushed aside my own emotions to keep peace, to keep harmony, to keep my family happy. But I had forgotten to keep myself. That morning, in the silence of my bedroom, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. I felt my own presence. Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a caretaker, not as a background figure. Just me. A woman who had carried the weight of expectations for decades. A woman who had been shaped by responsibilities, shaped by sacrifice, shaped by the fear of disappointing others. A woman who had given so much that she didn't even know what she had left inside her. My throat tightened. My heart felt heavy, but not broken, just tired. So tired. I whispered into the quiet room, "Who am I without all of this? Who am I without being needed?" The walls did not answer, but something inside me did. A soft, painful voice, a voice I had ignored for years. You are someone. You always were. But you never looked at yourself long enough to see it. And that was the moment I realized. The hurt I felt wasn't because of my daughter-in-law, or my son, or my family. The hurt came from never seeing myself as anything more than a role. I had forgotten that I was a person first. The quiet doorway to truth. Later that afternoon, the house was silent again. My son was at work. My daughter-in-law was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I stepped outside my room and stood in the hallway. I watched her for a moment, not with anger, not with blame, just with quiet understanding. She was young. She had her own pressures, her own fears, her own needs. Maybe she didn't know how to share a home with another woman who had lived here long before her. Maybe she didn't know how to handle the silent expectations that come with a mother-in-law. Maybe she felt judged. Maybe she felt watched. Maybe she felt afraid to make mistakes. And maybe, without realizing it, I had been holding on too tightly. Holding on to the idea of still being needed, still being central, still being important. And she, gently, unknowingly, was telling me, it's time to let go. Not of love, not of family, but of the old version of myself. The version who tried to earn her worth through service. The version who stayed quiet to keep harmony. The version who thought disappearing was the best way to keep everyone comfortable. I took a slow breath, and for the first time, instead of asking,
What did I do wrong? I asked, what do I need? The question felt strange, almost selfish, almost unfamiliar, but also freeing. The moment of realization. That evening, when my son returned home, he knocked on my door softly. Ami, are you okay? It was the first time in weeks he had asked me that with real concern in his voice. I looked at him, my child, now a grown man, and I saw something in his eyes I had not noticed before. Guilt, confusion, helplessness. He sat beside me on the bed. Did she say something that hurt you? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I said gently. She only said what she felt, and that's not wrong. He frowned. But you're uncomfortable. I can see it. I smiled. The same soft smile I had worn for years, but this time it wasn't a shield. It was acceptance. I'm not uncomfortable, I said. I'm realizing something. He waited, silent, patient. And then I spoke the truth I had discovered that morning. All my life, I have lived for others. I never learned how to live for myself. And now, when I am not needed the way I used to be, I feel lost. Not because of anything your wife said, but because I don't know who I am without my role. He lowered his eyes, absorbing my words, feeling the weight behind them. I love you, Ami, he whispered. I know, I said softly, but love is not the same as identity. I need to learn who I am beyond being a mother. He held my hand gently, almost like the way I used to hold his when he was a child. And in that moment, instead of feeling like a forgotten figure, I felt human, real, seen. Not because they understood me, but because I finally understood myself. The quiet evening that changed everything. That night, I sat by the window, watching the sky shift from gold to pink to deep blue. The world outside looked calm, peaceful, nothing like the storm that had moved inside me. But for the first time in years, I was grateful for that storm. It had forced me to stop, to breathe, to look inward, to rediscover the woman beneath all the layers of expectations. A woman who deserved love, not because she served, not because she stayed silent, not because she gave endlessly, but because she existed. I touched the window glass gently and whispered, maybe this is the beginning, not the end. The night did not answer, but I felt something inside me settle. A quiet beginning, a soft awakening. The day I learned who I really was, everything truly did change. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For years, mornings had been the same. Routine, predictable, centered around tasks. Boiling water, preparing breakfast, checking the refrigerator, sweeping the floor, folding clothes. It all happened so automatically that I never asked myself why I was doing it. But that morning felt different. I sat at the edge of my bed again. Not out of sadness, but out of stillness. Out of a quiet curiosity about myself. The house was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the soft chirping of early morning birds, and the slow, deep breaths of a home still asleep. And for the first time in a long time, The silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like space. Space for me. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to grow. I walked to the kitchen, but I didn't automatically begin preparing breakfast. Instead, I stood there and looked at things as if I were seeing them for the first time. The teapot. The mugs. The small spice jars lined neatly in a row. The sunlight creeping in from the window. I realized something gentle but powerful. This kitchen has been the center of my life for years, but I never asked if it was my choice. I had always assumed my only value was in serving others, but what about serving myself? What about discovering what I enjoyed, what I wanted, what I needed? A soft warmth filled my chest, not happiness, but something like the first step towards it. I made tea just for myself, not for the family, not out of duty, just because I wanted to. And it tasted different, not because of the ingredients, but because of intention. For the first time, I was doing something for me. A small moment with big meaning. Later that morning, my daughter-in-law came into the kitchen. She looked surprised to see me awake and sitting calmly with my cup of tea. "Oh, I thought you were resting," she said gently. I smiled. I was, and now I'm having tea. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the worry, maybe even a little guilt. And then she said something I had never expected. "I didn't mean to push you away yesterday. I needed space. I didn't know how to say it properly." Her voice was soft, honest, young. I took a deep breath, not to stop my emotions, but to allow them to exist without overwhelming me. "I know, and it's okay. Truly." She looked relieved, but still sad. "I don't want you to feel unwanted," she whispered. I nodded. "I know you don't want to hurt me, and maybe I should have understood your needs earlier. I'm learning, just like you." Her eyes softened. For the first time, I didn't see her as someone who replaced me or removed me from my position in the family. I saw her as a woman, just like me once, trying to build her life, manage her space, and find her own identity. Maybe we had both forgotten to see each other as human beings rather than roles. Sometimes love grows slowly. Sometimes understanding grows even slower. But that morning, something shifted gently between us. A small opening, a space for new beginnings. Letting go of a lifetime of expectations. Later in the day, while she cooked breakfast, I stepped outside to the small veranda. The air felt cool. The sunlight soft. For years, I never allowed myself such moments. I always believed resting was laziness, pausing was weakness, sitting quietly was wasting time. But now, as I breathed the fresh morning air, I realized how starved I had been for simple peace. I touched the railing gently and closed my eyes. It struck me then. I had spent decades trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect mother-in-law. And in doing so, I had never allowed myself to be a person who could sit and enjoy sunlight, a person who could breathe without guilt, a person who could feel without permission, a person who could rest without being needed. Tears gathered softly at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, like my heart had finally decided to loosen its grip on all the years of silent duty and unnamed exhaustion. I whispered to myself, You are allowed to be more than what others expect. The words felt strange on my tongue, but also beautiful, like a small seed planted in soil that had been dry for too long. A visit to my past self. As the day passed, I found myself revisiting memories, quietly, gently, without judgment. Memories of my younger self in front of a mirror, adjusting her hair before marriage. Memories of holding my son for the first time. Memories of running around the house, tired but fulfilled. Memories of nights when I cried silently from exhaustion, but wiped my tears quickly so no one would see. And I realized something heartbreaking. I had never once paused to ask myself what I wanted out of life. Everyone else's needs had become my identity. Everyone else's happiness had become my purpose. Everyone else's comfort had become my responsibility. But what about my happiness? My comfort? My dreams? Where had I hidden them? And why? The more I reflected, the clearer it became. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't useless. I was simply a woman who had never learned to choose herself. That morning, I promised myself something small, but life-changing. I will not disappear anymore. Not out of rebellion, not out of pride, but out of love. Love for the person I had ignored for too long. An unexpected moment with my son. In the afternoon, my son came home early from work. I heard his footsteps approaching the veranda. He stood next to me without speaking for a moment. Then he said softly, "You look peaceful today." I smiled. Maybe for the first time. He exhaled, almost as if he had been holding his breath for weeks. "Ami, I don't want you to feel like this isn't your home." I turned to him and placed my hand on his arm. "It is my home, but my home cannot be my entire world. I need something of my own, something that is mine, not just my responsibilities." He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not just as a mother, but as a woman with her own heart and her own stories. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. I paused. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an automatic answer. "I don't know yet," I whispered, "but I want to learn." After my son asked me what I wanted, his words echoed in my heart for hours. "What do you want? What do you want?" It felt almost unreal to hear those words addressed to me, as if I were a person with desires, not just a provider of them. But the truth was, I genuinely didn't know. For years, my wants had been replaced by needs. My dreams had been replaced by routines. My identity had been defined by the roles I played, not the person I was. So instead of answering with something immediate, cooking, cleaning, helping, I allowed myself to simply say, "I don't know." And for once, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt honest. Honesty is a strange kind of freedom, scary at first, but liberating once embraced. My son nodded gently, respectfully, as if he understood that my simple sentence meant more than it sounded. He said, "It's okay. You can take your time." Time. I had given years to everyone else, but never to myself. Maybe this was my moment to reclaim some of it. The first step outside the old patterns. That afternoon, when the sunlight softened and the house fell into a peaceful lull, I decided to go for a short walk outside. It wasn't planned, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even long, but it felt significant. I stepped outside the gate and let the air touch my face. Warm, gentle, familiar. The street was the same one I had lived on for years, but I had rarely walked it alone, Every time I stepped out, it was with purpose. Grocery shopping, errands, tasks, responsibilities. This time, I walked for myself. The trees lining the street looked greener. The sky looked wider. Even the air smelled different, as if the world had been waiting for me to finally open my senses. A few neighbors greeted me politely. I smiled back, but inside, something deeper stirred. I realized how long it had been since I simply allowed myself to exist, without rushing, without carrying someone needed me. I reached the small bench under the neem tree, a bench I must have passed thousands of times but never once sat on. This time, I sat. The wood felt cool. The breeze brushed lightly against my skin. I listened to distant traffic, children playing, birds calling each other, and I breathed, truly breathed. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had forgotten years ago. The memory of who I used to be. As I sat beneath the tree, a memory came to me. A memory of my younger self, a girl with bright eyes, long hair, and dreams she kept quietly in her heart. She wanted to study more, she wanted to write, she wanted to travel, she wanted to decorate her own home with little things that made her smile. But life had taken her in a different direction. Not by cruelty, not by force, simply by tradition, expectation, circumstance. Some dreams transformed, some were postponed, some were forgotten. But that young girl, she was still somewhere inside me. And for the first time, I felt her presence, soft, hopeful, waiting. I whispered into the soft afternoon air, "I haven't forgotten you." And in that moment, something inside me eased, as if a door had opened quietly, leading me back to myself. A simple decision that changed everything. When I came back home, the house was peaceful. My daughter-in-law was in the living room, reading. My son was working on his laptop. Everything looked normal, yet something inside me had shifted so deeply that the house didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a place I could choose to be in, not one I was trapped in. I walked to my room, sat at my small writing table, and pulled out an old notebook, one I hadn't touched in years. Its pages were blank. Blank like the part of my life I had never allowed myself to write. I held the pen for a long moment, unsure what to write. Then, slowly, carefully, almost with reverence, I wrote my first sentence. I want to understand myself. The words looked small on the paper, but they carried the weight of decades. Each letter felt like a promise, a quiet, gentle promise to the woman I had ignored all my life. Next, I wrote, I will not disappear anymore. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the courage of finally choosing something for myself. It was a small decision, to write, to reflect, to explore my feelings, but it felt like learning to walk again after years of standing still. A soft conversation over tea. Later that evening, I made tea for myself again, and this time my daughter-in-law came to sit beside me quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't tense now. It was warm, open, inviting. Then she said softly, I saw you leave the house earlier. Are you feeling better? I nodded. I am. I just needed air and a little time to think. She hesitated, then asked, About yesterday? I smiled. About my whole life. She looked down, understanding more than she could express. She said, I don't want you to feel unwanted again. Her voice was low. And this time, I reached out and placed my hand over hers gently. I know, I said, but I also know you need your own space. We all do. And maybe I held on too tightly. Maybe I forgot that my life can be bigger than these walls. Her eyes softened. She squeezed my hand gently. "We can find a balance," she whispered. "Together." Her words touched me deeply, because for the first time, she wasn't speaking as my daughter-in-law. She was speaking as another woman trying to build her place in the same home. And I finally felt strong enough to build mine too. The evening that felt like a new beginning. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room for a while. The lights were dim, the air was quiet, the world felt still. And in that stillness, I realized this was the first day in years I didn't feel invisible. Not because others saw me differently, but because I finally saw myself. I wasn't just a caretaker, I wasn't just a role, I wasn't just a shadow. I was a woman with a heart that had carried too much, a mind that had been quiet for too long, a soul that deserved space to breathe. And that night, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning of me." For a long time after that night, I moved through my days quietly, almost cautiously, as if I were learning how to live again. I no longer felt the urge to fill every silence with explanations or justifications. Instead, I allowed myself the space to breathe, to sit with my thoughts, and to understand them without fear. Something had changed inside me, something small yet powerful, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Maybe it was acceptance. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was simply the truth finally settling where it belonged. Whatever it was, it softened me. The soft morning that changed my understanding. A few mornings later, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside my window was still a gentle shade of blue, the kind you only see before sunrise. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and made myself a cup of tea. As I held the warm cup in my hands, I felt a deep stillness inside me, the kind I had not felt for many years. I sat by the window and watched the first light of day slowly enter the world. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, tears filled my eyes. Not tears of sadness, not tears of anger, but tears of recognition. I whispered to myself, "So this is who I am now." I realized I was no longer the woman who hid in silence for the sake of keeping peace. I was no longer the woman who accepted blame that was never mine to carry. And I was no longer the woman waiting for someone else to validate her existence. I had stepped into a new version of myself, and she felt familiar, as if she had been waiting for me all along. My son came to me with a question. That same afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was my son. His expression was gentler than usual, and there was something in his eyes, a mixture of concern and hesitation. "Immy, can I talk to you?" I nodded and moved aside to let him in. He sat on the edge of my bed, his hands clasped tightly together. "I've noticed you've been quiet lately. Not sad, just different." I smiled faintly. "Different can be good." "I know," he said. "I just want to understand what's going on in your heart. I feel like I missed something. Maybe many things." His words reached me deeply. For years, I had wanted him to ask me something like that. Not to fix anything, not to take sides, just to see me. I took a slow breath and I said, I'm learning about myself. And that means I'm also learning what hurts me and what heals me. He lowered his gaze. Have I hurt you, Emmy? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. I shook my head. Not intentionally. You never hurt me with your hands or your words. But sometimes silence can be heavy. Sometimes not being asked how I feel can be its own kind of wound. He looked up, eyes filled with something like guilt. I'm sorry. I should have been more attentive. I should have noticed. No, I said gently. You did what you knew. You lived your life the way you were taught to. I'm not blaming you. I'm just telling you what it feels like to be me. He nodded slowly, as if those words stayed with him. And for the first time in a long, long while, we sat together in quiet understanding, not as mother and son bound by duty, but as two human beings learning how to speak their truths. A small gesture that meant everything. Later that week, something unexpected happened. My daughter-in-law approached me while I was arranging spices in the kitchen. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Emmy, can I help you? It took me a moment to respond. She rarely asked to help with anything, and even when she did, it was usually out of convenience, not connection. But this time it felt different. I handed her a jar and pointed to where it belonged. She placed it carefully and turned to face me. Her eyes were calm, but there was a seriousness in them I hadn't seen before. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about the other night, about what I said, about everything. I kept quiet, allowing her the space to speak. I didn't mean to hurt you. I felt overwhelmed. And sometimes I take things out on people who don't deserve it. Her honesty surprised me, not because she was incapable of it, but because she rarely allowed her vulnerability to show. I understand, I said softly. Life can be heavy for all of us. No, she shook her head, eyes glistening slightly. I need to say this properly. I'm sorry, Emmy, truly. I shouldn't have spoken the way I did. Her voice broke on the last word. My heart softened further. I didn't want her to feel punished or guilty. I didn't want to carry resentment either. I had lived with enough unspoken wounds. So, I took her hand gently and said, Thank you. Your apology means a lot. And in that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly. Like a door that had been stuck for years, finally opening just enough to let light through. A new kind of peace. The days that followed were still imperfect, but they were warmer. My daughter-in-law began offering small gestures, asking if I'd like tea, inviting me to sit with her in the living room, sharing little stories about her day. Nothing grand, nothing exaggerated, just human moments. And I responded with the same softness. I didn't overgive. I didn't chase approval. I simply existed as myself, steady, kind, and present. My son, too, became more attentive. He started joining me for tea after work, sitting with me for a few minutes even if he was tired. He asked how my day was. He asked if I needed anything. He asked about my feelings. These small gestures may seem ordinary to someone else, but to me, they were extraordinary because I no longer felt invisible. I felt seen and I felt heard. Not because I demanded it, but because I finally learned who I was beneath everyone else's expectations. Understanding my own worth. One evening, as I sat alone on the balcony watching the moon rise behind the trees, a realization came to me. Quiet, but powerful. For most of my life, I had measured my worth through others, through their appreciation, their approval, their acceptance. But now, for the first time, my worth came from within, from my resilience, from my kindness, from my ability to love even when I felt unloved, from my strength to stand alone without bitterness. I whispered into the night, "This is enough. I am enough." And the wind felt warmer after I said that. A week later, I visited the old neighborhood where I grew up. I hadn't gone back in years. The streets were the same, yet everything felt different because I was different. I walked past the small bakery where my mother used to buy bread on Sundays. I paused outside the school where I had learned to write my first letters. I even stood in front of the house where I had spent my childhood, a house filled with love, hardship, and lessons. And as I stood there, looking at the place where I began, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and peace. I whispered into the night, "Thank you. You made me who I am. Not the broken parts, not the lonely parts, not the parts that people misunderstood, but for many years, I believed that life changed only when people around us changed, when they became kinder, more understanding, or more attentive. I thought peace would come the day someone finally saw my pain, the day someone finally asked, "Are you okay?" But now, after everything I have lived, I understand something much deeper. Life changes the moment we begin to see ourselves. It happens quietly, almost unnoticed, like a candle being lit in a dark room. The darkness is still there, but it no longer controls the space. That is how I felt, standing in the quiet of my own thoughts, realizing that the day I learned who I really was, everything changed. Not because the world suddenly became gentle, but because I finally became gentle with myself. The peace that comes from knowing yourself. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't turn into a perfect story. There were still moments of silence, misunderstandings, and days when emotions felt heavier than usual. But the difference was inside me. I no longer feared those moments. I no longer felt the need to justify my existence. And I no longer waited for someone to make space for me. I made space for myself. Every morning, I took a few minutes just to breathe and remind myself of the simple truth I had discovered. I am not invisible. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. I am enough, exactly as I am. That sentence became a quiet prayer in my heart, a reminder that I didn't need to be perfect or loud to deserve respect, love, and peace. My family began to see me differently. As the days passed, something changed in my home. Not dramatically, but in small, meaningful ways. My daughter-in-law became gentler in her words. She began asking for my advice again. She invited me to sit beside her instead of across the room. Sometimes, without saying anything, She would place a cup of tea beside me and smile softly before walking away. My son became more attentive. He asked me about my day. He shared parts of his life that he once kept to himself. He no longer saw me as someone who would always be there, regardless of how she felt. He saw me as a person with a heart that needed acknowledgement. These changes weren't forced. I didn't ask for them. They came naturally because when you begin to value yourself, others start to value you too. A quiet evening and a gentle realization. One evening, I stood in the kitchen, watching my daughter-in-law prepare dinner. My son arrived home and leaned down to kiss my forehead softly. In that gentle gesture, something inside me shifted again, not painfully this time, but with warmth. All those years I had carried the weight of being misunderstood. All those years I had feared losing my place in my son's life. All those years I had believed that love must always be proven, always be earned, always be fought for. But standing there, I understood something new. Love does not disappear just because it becomes quiet. Respect does not vanish just because it was never spoken. And family does not break just because it bends. Sometimes it just needs time to understand itself. And sometimes we need time to understand ourselves too. The final lesson I learned. If I could speak to the woman I used to be, the one who cried silently into her pillow, the one who apologized even when she didn't know the reason, the one who lived in fear of being a burden, I would hold her hands and tell her gently, "You don't have to disappear to keep the peace. You don't have to shrink to be loved. You don't have to prove your worth. You already have worth simply because you exist." I would tell her that life becomes softer when we stop running from our truth and start embracing it. And I would tell her that the day she finally learns who she really is, everything will change. Not because the world will change, but because she will. Closing reflection. So now, when I sit quietly by the window and watch the evening light fade into the horizon, I no longer feel small or forgotten. I feel whole. I feel like a woman who walked through years of silence and still found her voice. A woman who carried heavy memories, but never let them harden her heart. A woman who learned that belonging begins within. And as I close my eyes each night, I whisper a simple promise to myself. I will never forget who I am again. Because that was the day everything changed. Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in the quietest, most beautiful way a life can change. From the inside.